I'm sure by now many of you have heard about the tragic incident that occurred in Boulder, Colorado. I'm not going to get into graphic detail because I want to focus on the arguments that are affecting us politically from things like this. First and foremost, the culprit in this tragic incident, they said, many progressives, was a white man because preliminary photos came out showing what appeared to be a white man. As it turns out, I guess technically it's not a white guy. I don't know how the rules work on the left, but this guy is apparently a Muslim who hated Trump, hated conservatives, and had sympathies for ISIS, which is another stereotypical type, culprit, I suppose. We have a few tweets that are included in a post from the Post Millennial. Ian Miles Chong says, from the suspect's now removed Facebook page, he said, quote, he inherited a growing economy and the unemployment rate was low. The economy was on an upward spiral. He won because of racism. These are comments that the culprit in Boulder said about Donald Trump. The reason I bring this up is not because this segment is going to be about this man. This segment is going to be about gun control and political manipulation. The left, there was one tweet, it was Amy Siskind, said, obviously it was a white man that did this. And then once the name came out and there was an L in front of it, and people realized it was not your typical white male, this was, a guy with accused of having ISIS sympathies. Now she said something like, let's not glorify the shooter and focus on his name. All right. Well, as you can probably expect, this is all moving in one direction. Gun control. And I got to tell you, my friends, having become a gun owner in the past year, it's really insane reading tweets from many of these people because right now the big trend on Twitter is AR-15, Second Amendment, gun control, etc. And it's amazing how little these people know, but they're driven by tribalism. That's it. They're not driven by solutions, right? Many of these people say they want gun control because they want to minimize harm. I would believe that if they actually sat down and had a conversation with somebody who understood anything about guns. When I try explaining to people anything about guns, they recoil, go full tribal and say, why are you defending the person? Or we just want to save lives, or they change the subject. Give a shout out to my good friend, Cameron Kasky, who normally I like the tweets he posts. He's, a bit of a, traditional leftist. Well, I shouldn't say leftist. He's more of a traditional liberal, pro-Democrat type personality. He has those typical Democrat talking points. And when I point out a few things, notably, he mocks Second Amendment rights individuals, which includes leftists, and I'll prove it. He says, he's laughing at these people who think that they're going to be able to defend themselves against the U.S. government and things like that. My response was, ask the Viet Cong or the Taliban. Hellfire missiles cannot occupy city streets. Instead of responding with any kind of defense of his idea, he just breaks down and starts making snarky jokes. All right, fine, I get it. You're trolling. You don't actually believe what you're saying. All right, I guess. I walked into that trap, and Kasky doesn't actually believe what he purports to post about. Fine. If I got trolled, I got trolled. But there are many people who are following him and responding who don't know anything about this stuff. And when I make a simple point about what is a hunting rifle versus what is an actual weapon of war, people don't like the truth. For those that aren't familiar, before we get into the news about the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I have on the screen, and we're going to talk about manipulation, media propaganda, and tribalism, I would just like to say to all the people who are saying ban AR-15s, you're not saying anything. Like, I don't understand what it is you actually want to ban, because there's a bunch of other kinds of guns that function similarly, semi-automatic rifles, and the AR-15 is just one of many. Would banning the AR-15 mean not banning the AR-10? Would that mean that like Vectors and, Rugers, those are all fine? Are you saying you don't want semi-automatic rifles? Are you talking specifically about like 5.56 NATO? I don't know what you mean when you say this. And they try and do this thing where they're like, look at every single one of these instances where a tragedy has happened and it's all AR-15s. And I'm like, that's like saying gun. It's like, look at all of these instances with guns and they used a gun. I'm like, okay. What's really crazy is that, and I really want to get into this because I've become much more of a gun. I don't necessarily want to say advocate, I suppose, but as a gun owner and someone who actually knows about this stuff, it's getting really frustrating for me because I'll tell you this. I do believe there are regulations and laws that could actually help solve these problems. I know And all of the staunch 2A people recoil in disgust and horror. Tim, hold on. I didn't say where those regulations would lie. And I think we need to have a legitimate conversation about whether or not background checks work and whether or not there's an issue with mental health. You see the problem. The regulation to stop gun violence doesn't need to be necessarily on guns. There's other things that can be done in other areas. How about everyone's allowed to keep and bear arms, but then you have specific, you have guards, you prepare for these things. I'm just saying, simply put, a legitimate conversation about gun control and gun rights doesn't necessarily mean the solution is putting laws on guns, ammunition, and gun accessories, especially with 3D printing. There's photos of people, they 3D print and mill their own weapons, man. Cat's out of the bag. Well, here we go, baby. The New York Post. Senate Judiciary Committee to hold gun violence hearing Tuesday. A top Senate committee will convene Tuesday for a hearing on gun violence less than 24 hours after the tragedy in Boulder. The Senate Judiciary Committee will kick off its constitutional and common sense steps to reduce gun violence hearing at 10 a.m., which will consider public health, law enforcement, and community-based approaches aimed at saving lives and making communities safer. I got no problem with that. The issue I will say is likely, which I will likely have a problem with, is that it's all a disguise for just taking away people's rights. The left and the right are in complete agreement. People have a right to keep and bear arms. I know. All of a sudden, everyone's saying, what are you talking about? The left wants to ban guns. They don't. Because I don't consider authoritarian right corporate Democrats to be leftists. And that is, maybe I should clarify and we should adapt our speaking on this. Because I've often referred to the Democrats as the left in a colloquial sense. But in the true left, the Marxists, the socialists, I always point out, these people love guns. And Karl Marx told them to. Now, as the Democrats are starting to push this narrative, and we do have these tragedies, I want to show you just how depraved things can really be. Check this out. A few weeks ago, we saw what looked like a coordinated series of fake stories. Look at this. Mass shooting surge in Pennsylvania as nation faces record high. Mass shooting surge in Missouri as nation faces record high. In Florida, record high. Tennessee, record high. In Wisconsin, in New York, mass shootings fall, but nation faces record high. What's with all of these identical stories that are written the exact same way, which are lying? Well, I shouldn't necessarily say lying, but poorly framed to mislead people into not realizing what's going on. You may have heard about what happened in Boulder and Atlanta, and these are horrifying stories, and it breaks my heart when I hear these things. But you don't hear about what happened in Chicago, did you? Did y'all hear about what happened in Chicago last weekend? You didn't. And why is that? Why is it that you didn't hear about what happened in Chicago a week ago? Because it was, I don't know, equally as bad as or worse as these tragedies. I think it's because the woke left, these are white progressives from the suburbs. They are not moved or inspired by a story about inner city black youth engaging in acts of violence against other inner city black youth. I am motivated by this because I see these stories and I think it's a nightmare. I lived those. I grew up in Chicago. I saw these things play out. I saw fights devolve into shootouts or almost shootouts. But I've seen people in Chicago shoot guns. I'd been shot at randomly in Chicago. Don't know why. When I hear these stories about Chicago, it breaks my heart. And then I look around and they don't tell that story. You know why? I think they're actually targeting well-to-do white liberals. They're not leftists. They're white liberals. They're authoritarian right corporate Democrat types. These are people who want to be in the tribe and want to push the narrative. And so do they relate to Chicago inner city youth violence? No, of course not. That story's not going to motivate anybody. You'd think they could play up the racism angle and say it's these poor communities. The problem is the crime is among minorities targeting minorities. So what do? They focus on other instances where they can make it about a different race attacking a different race, thus racism. They tried to do that with Boulder. It turns out the guy was actually a Muslim, so I don't know how that plays out with their narrative. But let's talk about gun control, my friends. And I'm going to get into some of what we're seeing on social media. The first thing I want to do is show you how the best quote probably from Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx has one of the best quotes ever. Yeah, that's right. I can hear all the communists, all the capitalists cringing, but it's true, and I'll read it for you. Karl Marx said, "Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated by force if necessary." Woo! Karl Marx. He's got it on that one. Got to give it to him. I think the reality is, Karl Marx may have had a fairly dumb ideology, but he had a lot of things right. He pointed out a lot of important things. The problem is his solutions, not good. I think it's fair to say that Marx identified some problems and pointed out some areas like this where under no pretext should you give up your arms or ammunition. The problem is his ideology ultimately led dictators to weaponize it for the opposite of what he probably actually intended. That's too bad. A lot of his ideas made sense, and I would say his solutions are nightmarish and childish. But when it comes to this, he pointed out something correct. And there's a quote you'll see from many leftists. They'll say it on Twitter. Under no pretext. I love it. That's a fantastic phrase, and I'll use it now. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. I agree. And I got to tell you, it's not about, in my opinion, a tyrannical government. For many people, it is. Not for me. For me, it's about, for one, I, as an individual, am not going to be left to the whims of some lunatic who wants to break into my house and kill and rob me because he doesn't care about the law. I do care about the law, which means as a law-abiding citizen, I abide by the laws as it pertains to firearms. If they ban certain firearms, guess what? Depending on how the laws work, if they're grandfathered in, then, we're fine. But if they said you can't have a certain thing, yeah, I'd give it up because I follow the law. And therein lies the big problem. We law-abiding citizens don't want conflict, war, or crisis, but we want the right to defend ourselves. I especially I've been already told in certain states where they're like, you're not allowed to have a gun unless you have a legitimate reason. They're like, oh, yeah, you definitely do. Because I have stalkers and creepy people who've tried breaking into my home. Should I not have the right to defend myself? So then they say, yeah, but we only want to ban the AR-15. And I'm like, fine, but that makes no sense. What are you really banning? So any other weapon that can fire a 5.56 or a 2.23 is fine, just not that specific model, that specific build? You're not telling me anything. But let's take a look at how we're doing. The Onion. You may have seen this. No way to prevent this, says only nation where this regularly happens. It's amazing. I made fun of several news outlets for fact-checking the Babylon Bee. But, man, it is a sad day when we have to remind people what a joke is. Because people on the left believe the Onion is real. So I can understand that issue when, Snopes had to fact-check the Babylon Bee. It's because many of these liberal Democrat types, not the leftists, I think, believe dumb things, but hey, we can agree on certain things, right? It's these traditional Democrat types that think satire is real. They think it's real. They think this is a real story. We're the only nation where this regularly happens. Did you just Google search it? That's not true. It's amazing. So I Google searched it. Mass shootings by country 2021 per capita. The U.S. is number 66 in terms of mass shootings. Now, because we are a very large country with 330 million people, yeah, of course we have more mass shootings. But that's just hard numbers. It doesn't actually take into account the culture of the issue. Europe has more. Apparently, Svalbard has more. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Norway. But you can see Norway has the death rate per 1 million is 1.8. The U.S. is 0.089. Remarkable. So it's just not true. My next question is Chicago, New York, L.A. How many mass shootings, how many of these just shooting events do we have in, say, Texas, where people got armed to the teeth, or West Virginia, where people are especially armed to the teeth, and you have constitutional carry? It's just not there, is it? It's weird, isn't it? Let me show you something. We have this post from Muslim Marine, a verified Twitter user. He posts, an AR-15 uses the same exact round my M16 used when I served in the Marines. Even as an active duty Marine, our weapons were stocked, locked in an armory and only permitted during training or war. P.S. An AR-15 is a weapon of war and should not belong in the hands of everyday citizens. No, it isn't. An M16 is. That's why we have the civilian variant, the AR-15. Here's what I don't understand. I mean, I guess I do get it. Narrative, right? This guy, Muslim Marine, is a verified user. He got 2,300 retweets on this post. And it's just lies. All lies. If I want to sit down with you and have a conversation about what weapons we do want to ban and why, you have to at least be honest with me. But they're not. They're authoritarian right. They're not libertarian right. They're not authoritarian left. They're like center-right authoritarian. They want a mixed system where capitalism works for the powers that be. They want to take away your rights. They are not about any kind of distribution. They're kind of in the middle, I suppose. So maybe just authoritarian center. Hey, kind of like the Nazis. Let's break this down. An AR-15 is not a weapon of war. Quite literally not. Depending on which round you have it chambered for, it could be for a variety of purposes. An AR-15 is functionally just a modern semi-automatic rifle. So is a Ruger 1022. You're going to ban that next? I guess it fires 22, so sure, whatever. The point is, this is a lie. It's a manipulation. All right, let me show you the Bushmaster. For those that aren't familiar, okay? Because I know many of you probably know a lot more about guns than I do, but as someone who has recently been purchasing more weapons and learning about their functions and their uses, I give you the 450 Bushmaster versus the 223 Remington. The 223 Remington is what you're going to find in this. I believe the M16 for which Muslim Marine is referring to is chambered for 5.56. That's his weapon of war. This is functionally identical. The 223 Remington and the 5.56 are interchangeable, almost the same thing. The 5.56, I'm not entirely sure the differences. I think it's higher pressure. So the 223 Remington is still a powerful round. Now, on the left, on the screen, I'm displaying a 450 Bushmaster with a polymer tip. This is larger, a larger round designed to one-shot big game. It is more powerful and more devastating. And interestingly, it can fit. I don't know if that's true, but this is my understanding. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong for those that know their guns more than me. The 450 Bushmaster can fit in a magazine that is supposed to be for the staggered 223 or 5.56, meaning the magazines are functionally interchangeable. So let me tell you something. The round on the left, which is bigger, was designed specifically for hunting. It was literally designed to one-shot big game, hogs and deer. So when you are hunting, you're not firing too many rounds. You think 5.56 is not going to cut it. You need something better. An AR-15 can be chambered in 450. And in fact, that's fairly common. In the Wikipedia article for 450 Bushmaster, they actually show an AR-15. So when this guy says the AR-15 uses the same round, what does that mean? That's like just saying a car can have an engine. So you had a 5.56. Now we're talking about a totally different round for a different purpose. In which case, the 450 Bushmaster is a hunting round designed for hunting, used in a rifle that is used for hunting. Why would that get banned? What's the issue? It's simple. There's two things. Most of you probably know this. Most of you probably know more than me. But it's just a lie to manipulate. And I'll go through some of the tweets here. Second Amendment is trending. People are discussing the Second Amendment, which guarantees the right of people to keep and bear arms after an incident in Boulder, Colorado. One person says, reality check, the Second Amendment was written about muskets. Was it? What's the definition of arms? Pretty sure people had private warships back in the day, so I'm not entirely convinced that's correct. Jen Kuger of the Young Turk says, quick quiz. What is the only thing in the U.S. Constitution that mentions regulations? Answer, Second Amendment. It clearly states people with weapons must be well regulated. In America, that has been interpreted to mean that is the one thing that should have absolutely no regulations. Insanity. This to me is proof that Jen Kuger is not a leftist. He is an authoritarian right corporate Democrat masquerading as a leftist to rope up progressive votes for the Democrats. Of course, I've said that for a long time. All right, let's fix this one. The actual language of the original article before it was put into the Bill of Rights actually clarified you need not be in the military to bear arms. They got rid of it out of a fear that they thought it could be construed to prevent conscription, which was very important at the time. Okay, well regulated, what does that mean? Well, we can have an argument all day and night about it, but it's irrelevant. The text of the Second Amendment is a well-regulated militia, that, being necessary for a free state. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Perhaps the founding fathers should have just put the last part of that in there. But the first part was not referring to a government-regulated militia. The general idea, if you actually read history, was well-regulated in the sense that regular people, normal people in their homes, should have functional, clean, operating weapons because the militia was not the National Guard. The militia was not the army. They were farmers who had guns and were called upon when the defense was needed. What does that mean? Well-regulated could basically mean when called upon, not government telling you can't have the weapon. That's the opposite of what it says. Think about what they're saying here with this paradox of language. A well-regulated militia being, necessary for a free state, etc. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Keep and bear arms. It certainly has been infringed. In many states, you can't bear arms at all for any reason. No joke. But why is it that it would say a well-regulated militia is necessary and that you should the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? How is Cenk Uygur construing that to mean quite literally they can restrict what arms you have? It says not be infringed, the right to keep and bear arms. Written about muskets. Sure, but there were a bunch of weapons back then that were devastating. I mean, they had artillery, they had cannons. So what? The issue is we fought a Revolutionary War, the Boston Massacre, gun control. All of this stuff played a role, and the founding fathers knew what that meant. The idea is, and I think conservatives get this one wrong too. They think the Second Amendment is about tyrannical government. It's not. It's partly. It's about defending a free state, period. Let's say we are these United States and a foreign invader invades our soil. There is a gun behind every blade of grass. You know what that means? To maintain a free state from enemies both foreign and domestic, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Perhaps that was the appropriate language they should have used. They didn't. We can argue all day and night, but one thing is clear. The people on the left have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to how guns function and what they're for and why we should or should not have them. And that's my biggest problem with it. And it's always been my problem with it. I've never been a staunch anti-2A person. I've never been one of these liberals saying ban guns. No, because I grew up as like a far left anarchist type and don't trust the government. But at a certain point, I was kind of like, we do need some regulations. And I'll put it this way. I think we need national reciprocity. We need uniform code for the entire country. So here's what this means. Many states like Illinois, New York, Maryland, New Jersey would have their regulations relaxed. It would mean that some states would have regulations increased. To what extent? I'm not entirely sure, but I think a conversation needs to be had about it. I don't believe in a gun registry. I don't believe in gun insurance. I used to actually think gun insurance made sense. The problem is the Constitution. And it's not the problem for us. It's the problem for them. If they want to change the rules and they want to add these things, then they need to amend the Constitution. You get the states on board with that, then we'll have a talk. For the time being, I am interested in saying to certain states where there's just like, look, you could drive to Indiana. You live in Chicago. This is what they do. They drive to Indiana, they buy a gun, they bring it back to Illinois illegally. They're already breaking the law. So I don't know what else you change when they're already breaking the law, but maybe some kind of uniformity. That's about it. Ultimately, what I view as being appropriate is every state sees a reduction in gun control measures, what you're allowed to own, and a slight increase in, I don't know where the slight increase is, to be completely honest. I just don't know. I think it's fair to say that many of these blue states need to have many of their restrictions absolutely removed to align properly with the Second Amendment. And perhaps that's where we stop. I don't think red flag laws work. And I think as long as the Constitution says you have the right to keep and bear arms, we have a challenge that if you want to pass these laws, then you got to change the Constitution. Now, there's the possibility of precedent. When I say that I think there should be some increase in some states, I'm basically referring to, I don't know how to put it. I had a conversation with a guy in New Jersey who does trainings and trained the police. And he just said he thought that it was too easy in some states to acquire weapons. And that's something we should consider. But if we're looking at it like blue states have too many regulations and some states have too few, the bigger problem is it's 9 out of 10, the blue states with too many regulations and too many federal regulations, and the ATF is too confusing and the whole system is broken. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, to make sure I'm making this clear for everybody, I think we need like a 95 to 99% reduction in all regulation and then a very simple uniform code that affects the entire country, which would probably mean some states would see some kind of increase. But overall, everybody would see like a 90 to 95% drop in gun control laws. All right. I can't make this one too long. You get the point. I'm not an expert on guns. I'm just a dude who started buying weapons and learning about it in the past year. So I probably get a lot wrong. There are some people, and I had this conversation on Timcast IRL, you might want to check out the show, where I was basically like, dude, so long as Second Amendment says it, there can't be laws blocking this. The right to free speech, the only thing you can't do is incite someone to commit violence or commit a crime. There's a challenge there in that if they just keep increasing laws and increasing crime, then they can eventually criminalize hate speech. They can pass a law saying, something having to do with incitement, and then they can claim that hate speech is incitement. We must defend our rights. Yeah, well, I guess I'll put it there. I'll put it that way because this is a conversation that could probably be had 50 billion times for 10 hours. So I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.